How did 19 countries abandon their own currency for the euro? How did it cause the Eurocrisis? How is the euro managed and mismanaged? I wrote this episode in such a way that even if you know almost nothing about economics, you will still understand it. So enjoy. The European Union is compromise upon compromise by 28 different thinking countries, balancing between keeping national sovereignty or giving it up for the greater good, for the European project to function properly. The EU is a tower of duct tape. This is shown perfectly in action with the euro. Whenever you go abroad, you have to exchange your currency for that of the country you're visiting, paying a small percentage of your money just to get back less money. This hampered European trade, and so in 1999, the euro came into force for companies and governments. In 2002, coins and paper bills were introduced for the average citizen. So which countries have the euro? To be part of the euro, you must adhere to 4 criteria. The country's spending must be less than 103% of its income, your debt less than 60% the size of your economy, or GDP, and have low inflation and interest rates. Any EU country who achieves these goals must join the euro, except Denmark and the UK who have special opt-outs. The initial countries to join the euro were Portugal, Spain, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, Ireland, Germany, Finland, Austria and Italy. Greece joined in 2001, Slovenia 2007, Malta and Cyprus 2008, Slovakia 2009, Estonia 2011, Latvia 2014 and Lithuania in 2015. So what does joining the euro mean? Countries relinquish their control over their monetary policy, which means the right to print money, set interest rates, how expensive bank loans are, and inflation rate, the price increases for product every year. Instead, this is handled by the European Central Bank or ECB. The ECB is run by 19 governors, one of each of the national central banks of the Eurozone. But what is most important is what the ECB wasn't allowed to do. Fiscal policy. Okay, what the hell is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is how much taxes a government collects and how much it spends. Countries usually spend more than they collect in taxes, so they borrow extra money. And here lies the beginning of the euro crisis. Governments want money and investors are willing to give that money if they get a little bit extra back when a government has to repay, called interest. So an investor looks at Germany, for example. Let's see, you always pay back your debt, strong economy, and you don't have a lot of other debt. This is a safe risk for me, so I only want 3% interest. But the same investor looks at Greece and goes, your government collapsed in the 70s, you have a small economy, low tax income, this is very risky, I want 18%. But this changed with the euro. Investors now looked at Greece and thought, well, if Greece can't pay, then Germany will, because they have the same currency after all. This meant that southern European countries could borrow a lot of money. So to get re-elected, leaders went on a massive borrowing spree to give jobs and early pensions to their voters. And how did they repay these debts? By borrowing even more money, of course. And to make sure the EU didn't get angry for borrowing too much, Greece simply lied about how much debt they really had. In Ireland and Spain at the time, this cheap borrowing led to a housing bubble. This basically means that you could buy a house that was way too expensive for you with a cheap loan. And if you couldn't repay your loan, you just sold your house to repay your debt and make a little bit of extra profit as well. At least that's how it was sold to the customer. The same happened in the USA. When too many people tried selling their house, the price of property went down. Every investor in property suddenly lost a lot of their money. The same happened in the USA. When too many people tried selling their house, the price of property went down. Every investor in property all of a sudden saw a lot of their money disappear. Why is this so important? Because that meant there was no more money to spend on loans. The fantasy of cheap borrowing came to a halt and a global recession had begun. All companies who had invested in the US, Irish or Spanish housing debt were close to bankruptcy. So how could this be solved? Let them go bankrupt, it's their own fault. But they forget that if you want to buy a house or start a business, you go to a bank. If the bank falls, you have nowhere to go. You want to take out money from your bank? Yeah, you can't anymore, your bank is gone. Pension funds are also big investors. Your pension, your parents' pension, your grandparents' pension, gone. Millions of people in poverty in an instant. And what about the countries in debt? Regular companies who did nothing wrong, car makers, software companies, producers of food, all had investments in banks or companies with debt. Company after company would fall. Tens of millions without jobs. Poverty would run rampant. These same companies had also invested in government debt of Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy and Greece. And after a year of recession, these 5 countries were on the verge of bankruptcy. Remember, the only way they were able to repay their debt was with more debt, but nobody was giving them any loans anymore, meaning pensions, social welfare and jobs were at risk. So how can the government prevent bankruptcy? Normally, when you have control over your own currency, you simply print more money to pay off debt, salaries and social welfare. This lowers the value of your currency, meaning your products become cheaper for foreign consumers and for tourists. crisis. This is how most countries get out of the recession. Well, this had become impossible for the euro. Low prices for a struggling economy is good, but when your currency loses value, it becomes more expensive to buy goods from abroad. Not a big deal for struggling economies, you won't be buying a lot of foreign products anyway. You don't have the money. But if your economy is doing well, such as Germany or France, raising prices isn't likely to get you re-elected. And without Germany or France backing your idea, it ain't gonna happen. So the best and easiest way to solve your crisis is gone. But large economies like the USA find a way to support their poor regions as well, don't they? The USA has many systems in place to transfer money from rich regions to poor regions via unemployment benefits, healthcare for the poor, and government investment projects. In the EU, however, this is impossible. Sure, Dutch citizens gladly spend their taxes on poor Dutch citizens. However, ask them to pay for other poor European citizens in Greece, and you'll likely hear a resounding no. Mostly people in the USA feel like US citizens. Most people in the EU feel Irish, German, Dutch, etc. So imagine now you are Greece. What can you do? As the largest economy in Europe, everybody looked to Germany to help pay for the debt. If these 5 countries couldn't pay back their loans, then European companies could go bankrupt. If nothing was done, France might go bankrupt next, and then Germany. So Germany reluctantly agreed on the condition that these 5 countries adopt the German way of government spending. Germany and most northern European countries are generally very financially responsible, collect all their taxes, and people expect little in government support. This was not so in most southern European countries. If you want our money, you have to adopt our rules, meaning these 5 countries had to cut spending, borrow less, and repay current debt. Great idea, right? Not so much. For one, the government is by far the largest spender in any economy. Cutting government spending means fewer jobs, less government investment, and lower pensions. These people might no longer be able to afford a car, meaning the car salesman has to fire someone or go bankrupt, meaning they can't buy as many groceries, meaning a supermarket firing employees or it goes bankrupt, and on it goes until you reach the high unemployment rates we see today. So what has been done to solve the euro crisis? First of all, the affected countries sold government-owned companies, raised the retirement age, and made it easier to start a business. But this wasn't enough. Secondly, the EU set up a fund of 200 billion euro to keep failing companies and governments afloat. Thirdly, the European Central Bank began buying up government debt. So if you invested in Greek loans, you could sell that loan to the ECB to immediately get back some of your investment, meaning people were willing again to invest in Greek loans so the Greek people could buy houses and start businesses again, boosting the economy. Fourthly, to make sure another euro crisis never happens again, the ECB started checking government expenditure of Eurozone countries. If you spend too much as a country, the ECB can force you to spend less. And lastly, the Eurogroup was established. It is comprised of 19 finance ministers, one from each Eurozone country. They come together to discuss the future of the euro and to act quickly in case of an emergency. All in all, these measures finally seem to work for the affected countries, except for Greece. Greece is in a state where, according to current projections, it will stay in its turmoil until at least 2060. That's at least another 40 years of hardship because it joined the euro and they were forced to spend much of their taxes on repaying debt. So what more could be done? One solution is Brexit, a scenario where Greece would leave the euro, return to its old currency, and finally devalue their own currency to boost export and tourism. Great idea for Greece, very unpopular in the rest of the eurozone. If Greece leaves, other countries might follow, perhaps leading to the collapse of the euro and maybe even the European Union. The other countries could forgive Greece's debt, just forget about them. Most Greek debt is now in the hands of the ECB and governments, thus it wouldn't hurt the EU economy too much. Unfortunately, telling your voters you send vast sums of money to a country who created the last crisis isn't going to win you any votes, and thus politically impossible. Then the third option, Eurobonds, where all debt made by national governments would instead be turned into European debt, where all countries would collectively repay debt. But the interest on Eurobonds would be higher than those of Germany and the Netherlands. And if Germany, the country paying the most to keep these 5 countries afloat, says no to reform, it doesn't happen. So here we are, left with a country staring into financial abyss because politicians borrowed too much, countries didn't want to give up their sovereignty, and bankers issuing bad debt. So can another euro crisis happen? It's unlikely. But the euro still has many flaws. It's ruled too much by Germany, doesn't help poor countries who are in trouble, and the countries are too culturally diverse when it comes to government spending. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. I will be making one more video about the European Union and then move on to a different topic. This video was made in collaboration with my country, Europe. If you want to show your support for Europe, head over to their page by clicking here and see what they are doing.